Today, let's see how a good muzzle flash can be done in Unreal. I'm gonna show you the whole process from setting up Niagara, creating the meshes and drawing a quick texture too. And we are going to specifically see this one, which is one of the many I have available on the marketplace or on my Patreon page. There's 2 volumes with more than 50 muzzles. So yeah, lots of variety. I left links below. So without further ado, let's jump right into this. So let's begin by creating a Niagara system with right click. There's plenty of templates, but we can start with an empty one, down here on this button. After you have renamed this, you can open it up and with right click let's add an emitter, an empty one, this one, and a muzzle flash is done by using basically 2 planes intersecting and with this cone mesh, so we need 2 meshes. So this is for the muzzle planes. Down here it's set to sprite render. Let's remove that and replace it with a mesh renderer. For now it's using this 3D axis thing and we cannot see it because there's nothing emitting particles. So on the emitter plate, let's add a burst, spawn burst instantaneous with 1 for the count. Here we go. We have the axis spawning, but we want to replace this with the intersecting planes, right? So I'm going to show you how to create it. It's very simple. And I'm going to use Blender because it's free and it's easy to pick up. You can select everything and delete. And with Shift A, you want to add a plane. We want to enter in edit mode with Tab, select everything with A, and duplicate it with Shift D, and then press Escape so it stays right there, because now we want to rotate it with R on the Y-axis 90 degrees. And here we go, we have our biplanar done. They are intersecting, and that's almost just it. First, let's make sure that every time this scales up, it scales from the muzzle of the gun. So we want to select these 2 vertices, and with Shift S say cursor to selected, or go up here on mesh, snap, cursor to selected. And let's use Tab to go to object mode, and then in object set origin to 3D cursor, because and every time we will scale this, it scales properly from the muzzle of the gun. Let's just rename this to muzzle plane, in my case tutorial, so I can distinguish it from the other planes. And with Ctrl A, or up here in object, let's apply rotation and scale. So it looks exactly like this in Unreal. I'm gonna drag a new window from this bottom left corner. So we can select the UV editor, because we wanna make sure that the UVs, which is the way the texture maps to the mesh, are correct. I'm gonna press this UV sync selection button, so the selection on the UVs and on the mesh are synced. And now let's say that this is where the muzzle of the gun should be. And as you can see on the UV, it's the top edge. Which means let's select everything and rotate with R minus 90 degrees so the orientation matches. Exactly like this, looking good. With the plane selected, let's go to File, Export, FBX. I'm gonna navigate to my folder. Turn on selected objects and export as an FBX. Back in Unreal we want to say import, yes indeed, import all. And now on the muzzle planes emitter we can replace this with our muzzle flash plane. It's only visible in one side, but on the material we'll fix it in a moment. For now let's shorten this loop duration to 1 second. That should be more than enough. And let's say that the lifetime is very short. It's a muzzle, it's something quick. Let's say it's random between 0.1 and 0.2. A muzzle should have some randomness. Not much, but a little bit. And before creating the texture, we can take care of the scale. We want this to grow, so with the scale mesh size, let's convert this vector to a float and the float to a curve. Let's select this line that goes from 0 to 1. Probably we won't see anything because we need to say on the initialized particle what size does this mesh has. On the mesh scale mode we want to use random and non-uniform. A little bit too random. For example, the y-axis controls how long it is, Let's say the minimum is 1.5 and maximum 2. And for the X and Z, between 0.8 and 1.2. But there's a little problem because it's scaling up from the middle of the mesh, and we made sure that the pivot was only in one side. So it grows from the muzzle of the gun, right? And not like this. So I noticed that the mesh needs to be centered with the world origin. We can easily fix that if we press N to get access to this panel. And on the item section, the location, the y-axis, let's make sure it's 0. And as you can see, it's centered with the world. Alright. In object, in snap, I'm going to say the cursor is to selected, just to make sure everything's alright. And export this again, replace the other one, yes indeed. In Unreal you can import again, yes, and here we go, it's growing properly. Let's improve the aspect of this by creating a texture. There's very different ways to create textures. I'm going to show you a very simple one. If you have Krita or Photoshop around, you can create a new file with 1024 by 1024 with a black background, 2 layers. On the empty layer, let's make sure that we select this brush, the hairbrush soft, make sure the color is white, and more or less with this brush size, let's draw this shape. Now I'm going to press E to pick the eraser and cut these parts right here in the front and then in the back, so it's a little bit sharper. I'm going to decrease the size of the eraser and create some cavities here and there. I'm going to click up here. It will mirror my actions from one side to the other, and we can also align this right in the middle. It's very important, otherwise it will look kind of strange. But if you want, yeah, you can leave this on and it will mirror your brush strokes. Yeah, I'm going to erase a little bit more on this area and on the back. And then I'm going to decrease its opacity. It's too white on the perimeter of this drawing, so I'm going to remove here and also here. And on the back too. On the back I'm actually going to create a cavity, a small cavity, but I'm going to use this brush, the blender smear. It's very important that you click here to access the brush settings and say that the fade is 0, so it's smooth. Because with this brush, if you set the opacity, which controls the strength, to around 50, you can now drag these pixels. It will look much better, and the idea is to push them to the back. It adds motion, and on this area, the beginning of the muzzle, I'm going to push it to the center. I'm going to create this cavity, as you can see. You have a lot of freedom here. Don't worry about being too perfect, because if you want, you can use a motion blur on filters, as you can see. And sometimes that helps a lot. So yeah, don't worry that much about being perfect. And then I'm going to erase a little bit more on the beginning, this cavity, and on these extremities. And here we go. We have, in a couple of minutes, a texture. Make sure you hide the black background, make sure it's also centered and to the left as well. And then you can export as a PNG directly to your project. To use this in Niagara, we're going to create a very basic material. We right click, material, open it up. I'm going to say the blend mode is translucent, and then the shading mode unlit. That's it. Now with right click, search for texture. We want to use the texture parameter to D, call it the main text, and we can assign here our Muzzle Flash texture. Another thing very important is if we want Niagara to influence the color of this shader, we need this node, the particle color node, and from here we can multiply to RGB with the RGB of the texture. And while holding M, you can press left click and it will create a multiply node, or you can simply with right click search for multiply. Multiply RGB and then alpha, connect to emissive color and to opacity. Here we go. It's a very straightforward material, which we can then add right here, an override material, yes. Select the one we created and here we go. It's the beginning of a nice muzzle flash. As you can see, the texture plays an important part. If we move around, probably you won't see anything, it disappears. And that's because on the material, let me click here on an empty space, we want to turn on two-sided, so the faces can be seen from one side and from the other. And now you can move it around and it's visible everywhere. Cool, right? Let's improve this. We are missing the cone shape that comes from the muzzle of the gun. So back to Blender. For this one, with Shift A, we want to start with a cylinder, and without clicking anywhere on this bottom left panel, we want to say the cap fill type is nothing, so it's empty like this. You want to go ahead and select all of these vertices, and then with S scale it to 0. And without unselecting this, with G we want to push it a value of -1. Select this edge loop and push it up with G on the Z axis, a value of 1. Don't forget to lock it on the Z axis. Great! Now let's select everything and take care of the UVs. This is very simple. Press 7 on the numpad to go to the top orthographic view. We are going to use Project from View Bounds. It fills this whole space. Another thing we can do is with Ctrl R, add another edge loop, press escape so it stays right there, and another one, but this time push it down like this, and then press enter. And now, yeah, we need to press Z to see through, and then with B select all of these vertices on the center, so we can delete them. We want to create a hole in the middle, or you can leave it as it was. Anyway, back to object mode, and now let's rotate this on the X-axis, -90, here we go. And the very important part is that we enter in edit mode with tab, select this edge loop with B, you can press Z to see through by the way, because now with proportional editing, O for shortcut, we want to push, you can control the radius by the way, radius of influence, we scroll up and down. We want to push this in the back on the Y-axis, so we can create the cone shape, right? It doesn't need to be that much, this will influence the aspect of the muzzle, so yeah, I don't like to push it that much. And in object, we want to say the shaded is smooth, and that's it. Let's press Ctrl A to apply rotation and scale, or go to object and apply it there. Rename it to Muzzle Cone in my case tutorial. And oh, we need to take care of the pivot. First, I'm gonna move this with G, lock it in the Y axis by pressing Y. Right there, as you can see, right. And then in object, we can say set origin to 3D cursor. So it scales exactly in the same way as the two intersecting planes, right? And this is ready to be shipped, to be exported. As an FBX, rename it, make sure selected objects is on, so it only exports the cone, and press export. In Unreal, yes indeed, we want to import all, close this window, and now we can duplicate this. But first, let's make sure that we fade this out. With the scale color, we can turn off scale RGB, we want to scale only the alpha, which takes care of the transparency, but we want to convert this to a curve. Exactly, with this curve right here. It's smoother in the beginning and smooth at the end. And here we go, looks much better already. Now we can duplicate these muzzle planes for the muzzle cone. Ctrl C, Ctrl V or Ctrl D. Rename it Muzzle Cone. Let's replace the mesh with the cone we created. In my case it's the 5th cone that I have on this project. And here we go. It's right there. Yeah. So what's happening now is that the texture applied here is, well, if you look closely, it's completely horizontal, right? And we made the UVs of the cone circular, so we could map something a little bit better, right? So it's very easy if you have still the texture that you made in Krita or in Photoshop. I'm going to duplicate the layer, hide the other one. I'm actually going to turn on this mirror axis so I can see the center of my canvas, right? And with Ctrl T, while holding Shift, I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. Duplicate it again. Ctrl T, but move the anchor to the center of the canvas. And while holding Shift, rotate this amount. Duplicate again, Ctrl T, move the anchor, and rotate it to the other side. Make sure it's mirrored. You can try different angles, but it looks better if it's mirrored. Okay, and that's it. You can hide the black background, export as a PNG, call it the Muzzle Cone. In Unreal we can say import, yes indeed. We don't need to create another material, we can create an instance from the one we created. We right click, create material instance, double click to open it up, and up here in global texture parameter, we want to turn on main texture so we can change it to the cone texture we just made. And here we go. All we are left now to do is assign this material. You can rename the material, of course. Here we go. We have Muzzle Cone for our Muzzle Flash. It needs a few adjustments like random rotation and maybe could be bigger. Oh, and color. So for the size, this one can be between 1.2 and 1.4 for all of the axes. Yep, that looks better already. And if we want random rotation on the particle spawn, we need an initial mesh orientation. If we leave it as it is, it's gonna mess up the whole rotation, it's gonna be completely random. We don't want that. Let's say it's none. Let's control the rotation. We only want it on the y-axis. Let's make sure this is a range vector, so it's random. Z and X are gonna be 0, but it's gonna be random on the Y between -1 and 1. Here we go. Now that's better. Let me see it in the scene. I'm gonna drag and drop this Niagara system. Here we go. Alright. It just needs color. Yeah, maybe it's a bit too long, the muzzle planes, you can shorten that if you want. Let's say the color of the muzzle planes is the direct set. I have these very specific colors to save us some time. 50, 12 and 2.5. You can try different colors, obviously. I'm going to copy and paste it to the Muzzle Cone. On my seam I have a little bit of bloom, by the way. And yeah, it looks pretty intense, very vivid. That's very nice. Yeah, we have a bunch of muzzles here. In case you want to get access to them, they are on the marketplace and on my Patreon page as well, links below. Another thing we can add here is a quick flash. I'm going to copy or duplicate the Muzzle Cone, but it's going to be for a sprite render. We don't need the mesh render, let's delete it. I'm going to delete the scale mesh size because we want to replace it with a scale sprite size. It's going to go from big to small. And we don't need initial mesh orientation, delete it. Mesh scale mode unset because it's a sprite size. So sprite size mode, it's going to be random uniform. We don't need to distort this, but we need it to be random between 400 and 800. It's very bright because it's still using the same color. A very quick trick is to decrease the alpha to 0.05, 0.01, and yeah, it's still very intense because of the texture we are using. It's the default one that comes with Unreal. I'm gonna decrease it to 0.01, but it's still weird. So if you can open up Krita and create something like this, it's very quick. Make sure it's in the middle. Click one time, it decreases the brush size, or you duplicate the layer. Basically you want something like this, smooth like this, right? And it will look much better. As you can see, it's soft in the eyes. It's easy in the eyes. Yeah, I'm just gonna fade it out. You can hold Alt to copy this model, the scale color, right here, drag and drop, and yeah, we have a quick flash. Another thing we can do is add some stretched particles, some sparks, you know. Sometimes if you go look to guns, they fire quick bursts of sparks. We can mimic that by duplicating the flash, call it particle stretched. We need to make sure the spawn burst is 10, more or less. It can be random, by the way. Yeah, the sprite size, it's gonna be random, non-uniform, so you can stretch this. For example, on the y-axis, we can stretch it 60 and 100, and on the x, between 5 and 15, they can leave a little bit longer, 0.2, 0.4. What else? Oh, we need to add velocity. You can click Fix Issue, so it adds the solve forces and velocity on the particle update. And this add velocity is gonna be from a cone. It can be random, the speed, between 250 and 1000. Yeah, we can see something, they are going sideways because of the cone axis. 0 on the x, but 1 on the y-axis. Here we go. As you can see, they are vertical, the stretched particles, because on the sprite render, the alignment, we want to change it to velocity alignment. And here we go. We have some quick sparks in our Muzzle Flash. Yeah, you can make them brighter on the color, but that's essentially it. You have now a Muzzle Flash. And I would say it's a pretty interesting one. Considering the time we add, now you know that you can use different textures to create different feelings and different meshes as well. I hope this was a valuable tutorial for you. If you want to get access to a huge variety of Muzzle Flashes, I left links below to the Volume 1 and the Volume 2. They're also available on my Patreon page, where you can get access to even more visual effects for your games. It's a huge library, and you keep the channel running. I'm gonna say thank you to each patron that supported last month, and as usual a quick shout out to the top tier patrons, which are Ashkan Kalkali, Chase Kalus, David Molina, Diego Marcos, Frosty40, Gabriel OS, Grublab, Ivan Jacobi, Jay, Ginuga4, Leandro Drisio, Marcel Break, Matt Mohorn, Oitz, Pierre Mario, Pradip Sen, Sanofer, Static Samurai, Vulcan S, Varisuta, Whatever Marta, Will Pulliam, Zao Barcade, and Mijay Kim. Thank you all very much for your support. I hope to see you on the next video. Thank you all for watching, and bye.